Most people think that leasing is just about filling space in your property. But the truth is that lease, that piece of paper, that is the deal. That is your cash flow. That is your value. And a well-structured lease can instantly add millions in value to your property. And guess what? A bad lease can sink the whole deal. We're going to talk about that in today's video. Hey, what's going on, wise investors? Welcome back to the channel where we help you master the art of building wealth through commercial real estate. Today's topic is Leasing 101, how to attract the right tenants, how to structure smart leases, and how to unlock that massive value that is hiding inside so many commercial real estate properties. So let's talk about why leasing is the number one wealth lever in commercial real estate. Like I said before, leasing isn't just paperwork. It is the number one driver of property value in commercial real estate. And your income tied to your building is ultimately what dictates the value. Your leases technically are your asset. And that means a single lease can sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5, even 10x your valuation, depending on how strong the lease is and how it is structured. And that's the power of leasing done right. So let's talk about what this formula is, because the more you understand the math equation, the more you understand how you can apply it to your strategy and to your property. So here is the math that changes everything. Net operating income divided by the cap rate that is similar to the asset class, your property, is what ultimately drives the property value. So in an example like this, if you were through a good lease to drive some additional income that adds another $10,000 in net operating income to your particular property, and let's just say for the example that your property is going to be valued around an 8 cap. That is $125 additional $1,000 that you just added in value to your property by just finding a way to structure a piece of paper that drives a little more income, and all of a sudden, poof, you just got this value baked into your property. And that's something that I think is really important to understand. I know for me, that was a big light bulb moment when I really started to understand that leasing isn't busy work. This is a skill and a strategy that truly can create value out of thin air. So let's talk about, now that you understand this equation, what makes a great tenant? Who do you want to come to your building based on the types of tenants, based on the culture, based on, the overall building makeup and what tenants would be fitting in that space or not, right? We want to think about who we want to attract to our building. But that being said, there's really 4 things that I think about when I am trying to attract tenants to my building and what makes the best tenants want to come to you. The best types of tenants are, number 1, credit-worthy tenants. These are national brands, strong local operators, right? And they don't have to be the TJ Maxx's, the Walmarts, the Home Depots. If you can get those, right, of course, those are the highest credit tenants that you can possibly get. And they're going to be a lot more financially stable and strong than maybe the neighborhood hair salon. However, strong local mom and pop businesses, right? Some of those individuals have great credit as well, have good financial strength. So those are things that you want to think about in terms of credit worthiness, because the stronger the credit and the financial stability behind that tenant and that lease, the more valuable it's going to be to your particular building. Number 2 is proven businesses, right? You want to deal with businesses that have a strong track record, reputation, years in operation. They have solid profits. You're not going to be worried about them going out of business in 6 or 12 months. Next is alignment, right? Do they fit the property's traffic and the customer base that is going to be going to that property? You may not want to have a daycare right next to a liquor store, right? So thinking about the alignment with the tenants and your property and the overall culture that you want to create for not only your tenants, but also for the customers is very important for creating a successful plaza or a successful commercial real estate asset. Now, financials, reputation, and lease history matter. So understanding what their current financial situation is. Do they have a good reputation, and overall what their lease history looks like? Those are all going to be positives if they are landing on the right side of the fence. But overall, a great tenant that you can attract into your property, no matter whether it's industrial, whether it's retail, whether it's office, or any other asset class, the stronger the tenant, the stronger and more valuable the deal. So let's talk about, now that we know what these types of tenants are that we want to attract and what their identity or profile looks like, how do we get them to our property? How do we get them to want to inquire and engage and come to our asset? Well, we want top tier tenants. And so we want to market to these top tier tenants like a pro. And old school brokers, right, are just going to put a normal listing with a couple pictures on one of the websites like Crexi, like LoopNet, like CoStar. And again, that's definitely one of the strategies that you're going to want to engage with. You want to get brokers who eat, sleep, and breathe commercial real estate and leasing, specializing in your particular asset class, to market these properties to potential tenants for you, right? You want to present a clean space or a clear improvement plan of how you're going to help them get the property designed and set up for their needs as a business, right? We also want to make sure that we're targeting the right tenant types for your property and attracting the right ones that we talked about on the previous slide. And we want to think about ways that we can incentivize them, right? Give them a little bit of an incentive to come to your property. So whether that is offering competitive tenant improvements, that's offering them signage, maybe it's flexible terms, maybe it's, delay in rent commencement, maybe it's other incentives that are important to them. These are going to be things that will allow you to attract the right tenants to your property. Now, a little ninja tip that I learned from, one of my mentors who is very seasoned in the commercial real estate space and leasing is, depending on what kind of property you have, depending on what kind of tenants you want to attract, they will literally identify a list of their ideal tenants that they want to get into the property, and they'll go around their entire market, whether that's in the city or neighboring cities or in the region, and they will literally cold call them and ask them if they would be interested in moving over to their property. Now, it doesn't always work, but what I can tell you is, instead of just hoping and praying somebody comes to you, if you have an idea of who your ideal dream tenants would be, go to them, reach out to them. You can find their brokers on LinkedIn who represent these brands and inquire and reach out. You can even just call the local store and get in contact with management or maybe who the ownership is. So those are some creative ways, something to think about. Good tenants don't chase you. You got to attract them, and oftentimes you got to chase them down. Next, let's talk about the lease types that you need to know. There's a lot of different lease types and structures, but let's just go over kind of the overall most common ones, because understanding lease types before you sign a deal is going to be really important. Understanding what you're responsible for and also understanding what your tenants are responsible for. The structure of a lease type is very critical. A lot of nuances that will go into it, but for the sake of this video, let's just talk about maybe the most common ones. The most common ones are going to be full service gross, which is generally what you're going to see with a lot of mom and pop landlords. And these are individuals that just aren't super sophisticated and don't understand that they can put some of these responsibilities back onto their tenants. But under a full service gross lease, landlord is going to pay for most of the costs. Now, in a modified gross lease, this is going to be some level of shared expenses. The operating expenses to run the building are going to get shared between the landlord and the tenant. Now, in a perfect world, my favorite lease is the triple net lease, which is the tenant pays the taxes, the insurance, and the maintenance. Now, they're only going to be paying their pro rata share of how much they take up of your building. So, for example, if they are only taking up 50% of your building, then they're only going to pay half of the taxes, insurance, and maintenance. But great, you can pass half of that cost back onto them versus you having to bear that burden. That's a strong and amazing lease. And guess what? When the plumbing, leaks, or you have one of the light bulbs go out, guess who's doing that maintenance? They're not calling you for that. That's back on the tenant, right? If they're taking up a full 100% of your building, well, then you can pass a lot of that if not all of that, back onto them. Again, there's a lot of things that can be negotiated in or out of all of these lease structures, but really important just to understand that there are different ways that you can structure the leases. Not a one size fits all. So triple net leases offer better net operating income predictability, and that equals stronger and more stable valuations for your asset. We'll talk about more detailed and more nuanced leases and the variety of ones that are out there in future videos. But for the sake of this one, let's dive into the terms that make or break a deal. So talking a little bit about numbers, right? Base rent plus 2 to 3% of annual escalations. You want to have them moving up a little bit. Of course, you want to try and keep up with inflation, so that way you're not eating all of that and they're sharing in that, which is where rent escalations are important. TI allowances are something that often will need to be offered to tenants. If you don't have any cash to offer a tenant for a tenant improvement allowance, then you may need to go lower on your base rent if they're going to have to come out of pocket more to get the space ready for them. But if you have the ability to give them a TI allowance, right, and you can charge closer to, at, or above the base rent that is normal for the market, then that's going to be better for the overall numbers and evaluation of your deal. And tenant improvement allowances can vary depending on the work that is needed, also the existing structure and condition of your building. And that can range anywhere from $10 upwards of $60, $75 a square foot, depending on what kind of tenant we're talking about. Also, thinking about things like offering them free rent is definitely not uncommon, used as an incentive to get them in the door, right? Longer term leases are really important and more valuable, right? Because what that does is contractually, it shows that you have a income stream tied to your building for a much longer period of time, which again shows more strength and stability in the income, which is going to give you more insulation to protecting your value versus the alternative. Now, thinking about things like renewal and assignment clauses, those matter, right? And so you want to make sure that you're thinking about how you are working those things in or out of your deal and how they could impact the income growth and the stability of your plaza and the value of your plaza or your property, commercial property. I'm a retail guy and an industrial guy, so I'm constantly thinking in that terms. But that being said, right, these are applied to any and all commercial real estate asset classes. So every term is going to affect your bottom line. And again, there's a lot more details that go into this, but these are some of the big ones to get started with and understand that these are some of the levers that you can play with and negotiate when you're talking with tenants. Now let's talk about some of the leasing pitfalls that you want to avoid. You know, some lease mistakes are costly. I can tell you that one mistake I made when buying one of my big shopping centers was I didn't review every single lease detail, and details matter when it comes to commercial real estate. And this was an early mistake I made when I was getting into commercial real estate, and there was a tenant in there that had locked in a really long-term lease with no rent increases, and the option renewal to extend their lease was at a flat rate, so I couldn't even renegotiate and bring them up to market. So there was no value whatsoever that I could capture off of that tenant, that if I would have understood that and negotiated differently, I could have significantly captured not only more income on the property, but a significant more value. So thinking about that, right, is really, really important when you're talking about going through every single detail. It matters. When we said the lease is the asset, it's true. So making sure that you're not over customizing a lease for a really weak tenant, right? If it's a big tenant like a Harbor Freight, right, or a Marshalls, then you're going to be willing, based on their strength and how valuable that tenant is to your property, to, maybe over customize and give them some things that normally you wouldn't do for, the neighborhood nail salon. So don't over customize for a weak tenant, skipping the lease attorney. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people not have an attorney look over their leases. It is worth every penny. And again, this is protecting you, it's protecting your income, and it's protecting your value. So don't be skipping corners and just ChatGPT and everything. Don't get me wrong, you can use ChatGPT for a lot of great stuff, but not for the final stamp of approval when it comes to your leases. Giving too much free rent or tenant improvements with no commitment is another big mistake. Not vetting the tenant's financials, another big mistake. And there are many more that go on, but these are going to be some of the big ones that you're going to want to think about when you're negotiating and talking with your tenant reps and their brokers and how you finalize a lease. Because again, you're not just signing paper. You are literally securing income and insulating and baking in value. And this could be a big difference between winning and losing on a deal. So let's talk about some of the negotiation things that you may want to lean in on, right? I talked about pulling levers. The beautiful thing about commercial real estate is there's so many ways you can get creative and still make a win-win for everybody. So understanding what the different negotiating levers are is really important. And there's a lot of them, but for the sake of this video, right, let's just talk about some of the high-level, most important ones. Number one is don't just think rent, right? Think long-term value. So think about, based on how you're structuring this deal and how this deal is tying into the long-term stability of income and value, that could be something that really bakes in a lot of value into your asset. We could also think about how it ultimately is something that you can, let's back up there. So let's talk about negotiating like a pro, because good leasing is a negotiating game. And like we talked about, right, there's a lot of different levers that you can pull on to create a win-win. You can get creative here and know that there are certain things that maybe you can concede on and compromise on, and there are certain things that you can utilize and leverage to get what you want. So again, don't just think rent, think long-term value. Use competing offers for leverage, right? If you have multiple people interested in a particular space in your property, then of course you want to get a little bit of a bidding war going. Asking for personal guarantees where applicable, I think, is a great negotiating tool that you don't want to just make the business guarantee the lease. You also want to get somebody personally on the hook for that. So if you can get a personal guarantee in addition to a corporate guarantee, that's another little win that you can always negotiate into your leases. Favoring long-term leases with clear escalations and low landlord responsibilities are ultimately the goal, right? So based on the lease structure, if you can get triple net, well, then that's what you want to go for, right? And if you can, structure a deal where you have a longer term lease that allows you to bake in the stability of that income stream, that's going to allow you to compress your cap rate, which is going to drive up the value of your asset. If you can pass back a ton of responsibilities to your tenants instead of you having to take those responsibilities on, right, and that management, then those are great things of how you can make your asset even more passive with all the benefits of owning commercial real estate. So just know that win-win deals are built, they are designed, they are co-created. They aren't just found and fallen in your lap, right? So just think about that when you're negotiating. And here's what I'll say. Having a great real estate broker that is a leasing expert, if you're not somebody who is that yet, that's okay, right? Get around them. They're going to be somebody that, of course, you're going to have to pay, but they're going to be worth their weight in gold because of what they secure in terms of income and value to your property. So building those types of teams and individuals and relationships will be really important for success in commercial real estate. And guess what? You're going to learn in the process and eventually become an expert yourself. So let's talk about the final leasing checklist before you sign. Before you sign anything, okay? Just some very basic do's and don'ts. Number one is review your real estate contract yourself, start to finish, every word, every line. Don't get me wrong, guys. I am not somebody that likes to read in the fine print of boring details like a lease. But what I can tell you is when I shifted my mindset around the importance of this skill and the importance of these details, it gives you permission to really lean in a way that's going to make you better, and it's going to make you more successful with your leases. Number 2 is have your real estate lease before you execute it reviewed by an attorney, right? Self-explanatory there. Reimbursements need to be clearly defined. So how are the expenses, if it's a triple net lease or it's a double net lease, or if there's any reimbursements coming back to you from expenses that you're paying that your tenant is going to owe you, make sure that's clearly defined in your lease. So that way, when you go and ask them for those reimbursements, they're going, what are you talking about? That wasn't in our lease. Well, yes, it's clearly defined in here, making sure that you have that defined in your lease. Number 3 or 4 is escalations and renewals, making sure that those are detailed out and everybody's in agreement on those. Making sure that you have good, strong guarantor language locked in for who's guaranteeing the lease. Somebody's got to be on the hook for it, right? So that way, if something were to happen and they decide to break the lease, that you have some kind of recourse to protect you, your income, your property, right? And making sure that you have confirmed the tenant's business plan and strength. I want to know what their plan is, how they're going to, be successful in this plaza, not only to feel confident that they're the right tenant and that they're going to be able to succeed and that you feel good that they're going to be able to pay you and protect that income and that value. But I also want to know if there's ways that I can help them, if I can drive value to them, if I can be an advocate or ambassador for their brand, right? And what their business plan is, and I can, add some value there. That's a great way to create a win-win long-term relationship for you and your tenant. So just in general, right? Remembering every line item matters and making sure that you're not skipping over the details or, cutting corners is the difference between somebody who's really being diligent with their leasing and somebody who is just hoping and praying and leaving it up to the real estate gods, right, to bring them what they're looking for. So as we wrap up this video to kind of recap, right, why leasing is a true superpower, let's bring it home. Leasing is the fastest way to force appreciation in commercial real estate. I can't tell you, after wholesaling and flipping houses and all of the hard work that goes into, real estate to make income, to force value, to create big piles of cash, commercial real estate is the easiest way to do it. And leasing is one of those skills that can allow you to do it really quickly and really efficiently. So making sure that you get great tenants. If those tenants have strong leases, they're going to bring stable cash flow. Strong leases increase property value, right? Great leases equal better deals, better exits, better refinances, all of the above, which is the name of the game in commercial real estate. It gives you more options when you've got great tenants and great leases. So if you can master leasing and your commercial real estate game is never going to be the same as a result. And guess what? Either is your bank account and either is your financial future. And that is on the upside, a positive. So if this helped you up your leasing game just a little bit, know that we've got Leasing 202 coming for you as well. And you can watch that video on the channel. Hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe for more tactical commercial real estate content every week. And drop down maybe your biggest leasing challenge, leasing comments or questions down below. I'll be sure to answer those. And if you want to learn more about some of the tools and the resources that we have at the Wise Investor Collective, check those down in the show description. We got a lot of great stuff there. And if you're an active commercial real estate investor and you don't want to just watch videos, you want to be around active commercial real estate investors like myself and others all around the country buying commercial real estate, join us inside the Wise Investor Mastermind, where we break down deals, sharpen skills, and build wealth together. That being said, keep investing in yourself and your wealth on your march to $1 million and beyond. We'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.